Hello, and welcome to the 15th Sunday in Ordinary Time. This week's readings are filled with imagery. In the first reading, we hear of God who desires to pour forth His blessing upon mankind, as like the rainfall. And then in the Gospel, we hear the parable of the sower, right? The sower of the seeds. One seed fell on rocky ground, the other on thorns, and then the third on rich soil. But what we also hear in this week's liturgy is the futility of man. That since the fall of man, man has struggled with spiritual deafness, spiritual blindness, lack of understanding. And so our soil is rocky and thorny. And Christ has to uproot those rocks and those thorns so that our soil can become rich, so that He can produce abundant fruit. And this rich soil can only be brought about through a grafting on to the life of Christ. For every Christian, we're called to imitate Christ, to follow His example, to live the passion, death, and resurrection with Christ, in Christ, all of our sufferings united to His passion, death, and resurrection. And in that, Christ can bring about abundant growth. St. Paul says, the sufferings of this present time are nothing compared to the glory to be revealed in us. That you and I, as we suffer, Christ is able to bring about good fruit. A few years ago, I was serving in New Mexico, and we had an apostolate, which was called the Family Prayer Apostolate. And what we would do is we would go and visit the families of children who were making sacraments at the parish. So a few sisters and a priest would go and we'd pray with them. Well, one of the questions we would always ask to begin was, is there a time in your life when you knew that Christ was really present to you? And so often people would share about a time of suffering, whether that was their own physical suffering, or the suffering of a loved one, or the death of a loved one. They would all recount these stories of suffering and how they could see how close Christ was to them, how close God was to them. And the same is true for us. In our sufferings, Christ purifies us and brings us closer to Him. We can unite our sufferings to Him. And in that, He makes rich our soil, and that brings about abundant fruit. So this week, I encourage you to do two things. First, ask God to reveal to you the stones and the thorns in your heart that are keeping you from Him. And then the second, to give those to Him and ask Him to produce abundant fruit in your life. I'm praying for you and pray that your Sunday is blessed. God bless.